doing? How y'all doing?
Nice to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Many years. Thank you.
All right. All right. Hi. All right. How you doing?
Pleasure.
You on that, what you call it?
Yeah, it would be good if you guys were all in the shot
That's it.
together because they're interviewing him.
Close the door.
Yeah.
Is Eli wanting to see this or?
Oh yeah, let me get him. Eli?
Is it all right if we all
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
So we'd like to start off by saying thank you very much for taking the time to have us interview you and for everything you've done, you're doing, and you continue to do for civil rights.
Thank you.
So this is just like big name of like what we're doing. So
Tell me what y'all are doing.
so we're doing this thing called National History Day, which is a historical a history competition, and where a bunch of groups make projects, and like you can do documentary, an exhibit. So we're doing a documentary, and so the topic this year is leaders and legacy. So we thought Frederick Douglass was the perfect person for this because we can all connect to him. And we thought that interviewing you would be perfect because of all the things you've done.
All right. How old are you?
I'm 13.
How old are you?
13 as well.
13 as well.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
So our first question is, how has Frederick Douglass inspired you to do the things that you've done throughout the years in civil rights?
Well, Frederick Douglass was probably the first post-slavery civil rights leader. He was an advocate, an activist, born a slave, and then became a leader in his own right. When he had escaped to the North, he was with the abolitionist movement, but then he was controversial. He went on his own. And some of the abolitionists, William Lloyd Garrison and them, didn't want him on his own. It's almost like we'll speak for slaves, they can't speak for themselves. And that kind of independent, stand-up nature inspired me, that sometimes even those that agree with you may not want you to be the person to speak. And he was very inspiring to me.
Thank you.
Our second question is, what can Frederick Douglass's story teach to future generations?
That you cannot accept the limitations imposed upon you. He was born a slave, born chattel property. And he escaped and became a leading statesman, advisor to President Lincoln, part of the administration solicitor in Washington. So you've got to define yourself, set your own boundaries. Don't be limited by the boundaries imposed. They're your starting point. They don't have to be your ending point.
So you said that Dr. King used Gandhi's commitment to justice. So how is that similar and different to how you use Frederick Douglass's commitment to civil rights?
Well, I've done some research. Well, Gandhi used a passive resistance, nonviolence resistance that King studied and emulated. I studied Douglass because Douglass operated in a similar period of Reconstruction, where blacks were first voting, where blacks were first free, and where they had to deal with mob violence. Well, I'm dealing in a time of a first black president, where we're trying to get people to vote, where we're dealing with police violence, and where I'm using media. Don't forget, Douglass started North Star Magazine, media, the media of that day. So in many ways, Douglass became something 140 years later for me to emulate and update.
Thank you.
All right. What were some of his strongest characteristics, and how did they help him to become a successful activist?
His rugged and raw determination and his non-acceptance of imposed boundaries and limitations. They, like I said, they wanted him not to speak on his own behalf, even the progressives of that day. They scandalized him. He married someone they didn't like. They claimed that there were questions of what happened with North Star. All of that. He was determined, he went through it, and he became one of the great leaders of the 19th century America for everybody.
So I read that you visited the White House over 80 times and you have a good relationship with President Obama.
That's a rumor, but go ahead.
So, I read that you have a good relationship with President Obama. So how is your relationship with President Obama similar to Frederick Douglass's relationship with Abraham Lincoln?
Same folk are mad. They wanted to know why Lincoln would meet with Douglas, and people would question 6 years late why President Obama would meet with me. First of all, why wouldn't he meet with civil rights leaders? He meets with me and Mark Morial and the head of the NAACP. Why wouldn't he meet? He meets with labor leaders, he meets with women leaders. Why wouldn't he meet with me? And why wouldn't Lincoln meet with the one of the leaders of the abolitionist movement when Lincoln was dealing with that? So I think those that raise the question tell you more about them than they tell about us. I met with George Bush. I have pictures of him with Bush. I met with Clinton. So why is it so controversial when I meet with Obama, other than that they're really trying to play a political game? And why did they wait 6 years? I think this is more about 2016. I think they're afraid of our continued impact into the process of who's going to be the next president.
That's right.
So far, we've been speaking about Frederick Douglass in a good light, and I was wondering some of the bad things he's done as an activist.
I mean, again, I said there was controversies. Henry Garnet felt he was not militant enough. He was attacked by those that felt he was too close to the president. I don't consider them bad, but they were attacks. He had a young wife. But I think that overall, at the end of the day, people know you're good and you're bad, and they give you a cumulative score. If you follow sports, you make errors in a game, you might even strike out. But you win or lose the game by who's ahead on points. And I think that history said that Frederick Douglass was way ahead on points at the end. Yeah, he made some errors. Yeah, he blew some innings. But he won the game.
In the short documentary on History.com that you did called America, the Story of Us, you said that Frederick Douglass was a symbol for legislation of his time. How is that similar and different to how you're a symbol to legislation in our time?
Well, I think that we made some state adjustments in terms of racial profiling laws in several states and stop and frisk in New York. But the challenge is national legislation on policing. We have fought to keep the Voting Rights Act renewed, which we've done in Congress a couple of times with my involvement in my time. But now the Supreme Court gives us a challenge. So I think the road ahead for me is to try to make the national impact. Douglass and them had the same challenge. They were not successful in turning back the revoking of certain things like the impact of the Emancipation Proclamation and Dred Scott. We're trying to correct that in our time.
Frederick Douglass has helped many other activists do their things. You know, John Brown, Susan B. Anthony. But how did his help affect their fight for civil rights?
I think his support was vital. John Brown was an extremist. John Brown was killing slave owners. Frederick Douglass had the audacity to go and visit him. And when John Brown was killed, they were looking for Douglass. Douglass had to go hide out in Europe and was going to be prosecuted. They don't tell that story. Douglass had to deal with the controversy of whether they were going to say he was a co-conspirator with John Brown who killed slave owners. But of course, that in the continuation of history, we don't tell the controversy part. I think that the support of Susan B. Anthony was revolutionary, because blacks, especially Garnet, knows that we're about slavery only. Why are you supporting white women? Why are you over there? He did it anyway. He supported what was right.
So,
Yeah, you can look it up.
Yeah.
Well, how do well, he also at the end of his life he started to support women's rights.
Right.
Well, can you tell us some of the things he did for women's rights?
He stood with Susan B. Anthony. He stood with women's suffrage, and he was attacked for it by other blacks. But he stood with it, and I think that that is the right thing to do. Then it's the right thing to do now. whether it's women's rights, gay rights, you got to stand up for everybody's rights. If you do not defend everybody's rights, then you cannot protect your own.
All right.
All right?
So, what's kind of a follow-up question to that is, how did women view Frederick Douglass as an activist? Did they have a positive or a negative view?
I think it was split. I think that some viewed it very courageous and positive. Some felt they didn't need him. But I think that the job of an activist is to view history and do what is right and not worry about how people view you. God told me when I was very young that activism is like playing football. Half the stadium is going to cheer you, the other half is going to jeer you. Your job is to get the ball over the goal line. And if you listen, if you get too intoxicated by the cheers or too depressed by the jeers, you'll never score.
That's
All right.
Oh yeah, that's all we have.
Oh yeah, one more question. Can we take a picture?
Sure. Y'all are the best interview I had in a while.
A selfie, huh?
Oh, he's got it.
He's got it
Going for the
himself.
selfie. All right.